Evening, folks. Uper here. Tonight we are going to get into a bunch of different triggers. And by different triggers, I mean every single trigger. And we are going to walk through from top to bottom and explain what they do. First one we're going to get into is the unit is destroyed trigger. Now, this one, you're going to be able to define a wide range of settings. And when you go to create this new trigger, you can have it where it'll trigger on any time any unit on any side is destroyed. Or from there, you can drill it down as detailed as you would like. You can have it so it is just a side, maybe just a surface ship, a specific type of surface ship, a type of or a class of surface ship, or an actual specific unit. So you want a very specific carrier or oiler or submarine to be destroyed, this is the trigger you will want to use. Now, a few things to remember. It must be completely destroyed. One of the main uses you'll see this for is people will use this to record points. If a vessel or a plane is destroyed, you'll have an action where somebody will be scored points or lose points. Now, you can also use it to kick off a mission. Say you destroy an objective, now you can come back through and use this to trigger an OPFOR mission kicking off or something like that. You can also be aware that some units are virtually indestructible. When I say that, things like runways, tarmac, parking spots, stuff that, short of a nuclear weapon, is still going to kind of be there. I mean, a runway, even if you crater it all to hell, by the time you're done, you can still go back with a bulldozer and repair it. Now, if you hit it with a 300 kiloton warhead, there's probably not much repairing to be done. So sometimes you want to use a damaged, other times you want to use a unit is destroyed trigger. Sometimes you can have it where you can pair the two together. Now that's one thing with triggers. Multiple triggers can set off an event. Any one trigger can make it activate. So you could have it for unit is destroyed or unit is damaged. Speaking of that, next up is the unit is damaged trigger. Now this is going to be real similar to the unit is destroyed. The big thing is we need to set a damage percentage threshold. What does that mean? That means at what point is the damage going to set off the trigger. So if you have it set at 10%, when that boat reaches 10% damage, it'll fire the trigger. It's not when it has 10% remaining, but when it has 10% lost. So why do you want to use this? Obviously, if something's been damaged. Uh, be aware that if you completely and totally obliterate something, it may not ever fire a damage trigger. It just might be destroyed. That's where it can be useful to pair the two up. Sometimes the damage model isn't linear, so you can drop a bomb on something once, and depending on the subsystems that you hit, may not do exactly the same amount of damage as the next time you drop the exact same piece of ordnance but hit something different. Now, this works great for facilities like those runways and revetments and stuff that are hard to kill, but maybe you want to judge and say, you know what, if you've done 50% damage to this runway, it's enough to you know, kind of knock it out of service. Now, you can also kind of have it where you can try this for like a force preservation. So, say you're trying to bomb an airbase or a facility or a large ship, and you don't completely destroy it, but you just kind of destroy it. Depending on how damaged it is, you could have it where it maybe is going to try to run away or it's going to try to get back to port. And you can use that as a way to have the AI behave in an interesting and unique manner. Now, also be aware that fire will cause damage to increase. So if something's burning, logically, it's eventually going to get worse. And a unit that is slightly damaged, can become severely damaged and kick off the trigger. Next up is side points. This one is kind of just what you think it is. You set which side you're looking for, and then you can set whether it is greater than, less than, or equal to a certain amount of points. I shouldn't say less than, I should say when it falls under. So you could start somebody out with, say, 100 points, and then dock them as time goes on based on losses or whatever you decide. And then when they get below a certain threshold, be it a negative number or a positive number, it will kick off. Now you can also use this as kind of like a memory register, where you can have it where when side points are detected doing a certain quantity, you can have it where, say, every time the player kills a plane, he scores a point, but it scores also a point to the OPFOR. And when they see, say, 20 points scored, that might trigger the OPFOR to launch another wave of aircraft or something like that. Now, you can also store points in the neutral side, the biologic side, the OPFOR, or, one interesting thing, if a player is suffering losses, you can use this as a kind of stopgap. That way, when they reach a certain level, you could have it where it releases more friendly assets to help them out. Next up, we have the time. This one should be kind of self-explanatory. Let me pull it up here so I can look at it. The time is when this is going to kick off. You can have it in the future, can't have it in the past. The big thing to remember, this is Zulu time, not local time. If you go into CMO and you happen to be looking at a point in the map, all you got to do is scroll over and you will see the local time start to change. And why is the local time changing? Well, because you're in different time zones. The Zulu time, though, will remain the same. So that's what we want to key into. This is real good for scheduling your ops that your OPFOR might be going on or kicking off different events. Next, we have the unit remains in area. This one is real similar to a couple of the other ones that we have unit enters area. And you got to drill down on this list. And you can have it when anything gets in an area. You can drill it down by subpoint. The interesting part, though, is you now can set how long it's going to be inside that area and the area that it needs to be inside. So you do need some reference points here. I don't think 2 will work. I think you need 3 at least. This is omniscient. That's important because you can have something set off this trigger that nobody has detected. That might be okay for whatever you're doing, but it might not be the best if you want to have the sim act in a realistic manner. You can have it where it's repeatable, so different units that get in there. A lot of times you see this for things like a search and rescue. So say a plane goes down, it creates a life raft, and if you move a helicopter there and it remains there for more than 5 minutes, you rescue that that pilot. Now, you don't want to use it to kick off for stuff, unless you're sure you do. But there's another trigger that's units detected that kind of rewards the player. This will allow the OPFOR to kick off even if they don't know somebody's gotten somewhere. And that can be kind of frustrating as a player where, say, you route through a strike package and you know that you haven't been detected and there's no radar there and you're doing everything right, and then suddenly out of the blue, there the OPFOR is, jumping you with a bunch of MiGs. Doesn't quite feel fair to the player. So you kind of got to be careful on the usage on this one. Next one is unit enters area. Very similar to unit remains, but got a little bit different behavior to it. You can still set anything like we could on the other one. We set an area to be inside with some reference points, but we can decide the earliest and the latest that this trigger can go off. So maybe we're interested in it, but we don't want it to go off until a certain point in time. We can set that. Also of interest, we have not entering an area and exiting an area. The exiting one can be real interesting, as can be the not inside. This is also omniscient, so it knows whether or not anybody else knows. Now you can set up a line of these and have it kind of as a phase line. So as units move through some tasks, when they leave one area, it might set up a trigger before they get into the next. Random time. This one's probably about what you expected. You set the earliest and the latest, and it'll kind of pick when it wants to happen. Also Zulu time, not local time. You can use this one instead of the time trigger to have things happen in a range. Sometimes you want to have a mission go off the same every single time you play it. Other times you want some replayability. So you could have it where a mission kicks off anywhere from 0400 to 0900. Now, if it kicks off at the very beginning, that's a morning mission happening at just before sunrise. At 0900, it's bright and sunny outside, so the behavior that the player might experience will be different, and that can make the mission real unique and really enhances the replayability. My favorite is the unit is detected. In my eyes, this one does the best job of using the simulation to really determine when things should be kicked off. It always kind of drives me nuts when all of a sudden a unit appears or you suddenly hit a spot and things happen, and it happens in an unrealistic way. By using the unit as detected, and sometimes you got to get a little bit clever here, but you can have this where you can really reward the player for intelligent behavior. Now, there's a couple of things that we have to set up besides just what we're looking for. The main thing is the target side. This is who is being detected. If we drill all the way down, now you can have it where just the player has been detected. Doesn't care if it's a boat, if it's a plane, it's a submarine, that'll set off the trigger. Or you can make it specific to aircraft or ships or whatever it may be. Good example would be, say there is the player sending in a strike package of aircraft. You would want the target type to be aircraft. That way, when they're detected, the OPFOR can try to intercept it with a patrol. Now, the detector side is who is doing the detecting. The minimum classification is how well are they detecting it. Maybe there is neutral traffic, airlines going, and anytime they see an airline, you don't want them firing this giant patrol mission off. So maybe you want to have it so the OPFOR has to detect it at least well enough to know that it's a strike aircraft or a fighter aircraft. The area to be inside, you might have a radar that covers a really huge area, but you're only really considered about a certain part of it, or maybe over a certain area. Now, really the best thing here is, say you have mountainous terrain and the player passed through some F-111s and they really take their time pathing through all of those valleys in between those mountains. You should really reward them for not being detected until the very last minute. Then the F-111s can come screaming in and really dump a bunch of Durandulas on an airfield. Next up is scenario is loaded. This one has no options. This only fires when you load the scenario. It does not fire when you load a saved game. Now, the main place I've really ever seen this has been some of Apache's scenarios. A gentleman by the name of Rory. He makes some really amazing scenarios. Sakura Blue, a lot of the standalone scenarios are his. And if you kind of look at the way he structures it, when he loads a scenario, he's using a lot of Lua scripting to populate it in a really unique way that really makes for a lively and realistic scenario. You should really check it out because he's got everything here from neutral traffic to random placing of missions. So every time you jump into it, it's going to be different. Next up, we have regular time. So what's that? Think of it like a metronome. You just set this for how often it wants to go off. So why would you ever want to have this where the trigger fires every 5 minutes or every hour? The biggest thing, providing reports. Maybe you want to have it provide the player with a weather report every 4 hours, or update them on the logistics, or sometimes even just to remind them every 4 hours to do a certain action. This will occur every 4 hours or every however long you can set it. I think, let me take a look here at the time, you can do as little as 1 second and as long as 24 hours. Next, you have scenario is ended, and guess what? This means that the scenario has ended. There's no options here. This only fires when the player has ended the scenario, not when they've closed it, not when they've stopped it. So this happens if you have an end scenario action or if the time has been reached. You could use this to export data, to fill key values, but be aware that some actions are not fired. One good example would be if you had a message for the player at the very end, you would have to put that in the end briefing, and they would not see it as a message. Now, a few things to remember when it comes to how to set up your triggers. Naming them can really be important. Now, when you start out, you might only have a couple of triggers and you'll remember really well what they are. What happens when you're dealing with 50 or 60 triggers and they all have very similar names? Planes over the ocean, launch 10:30. Well, what are you launching at 10:30? So it really behooves you to pick descriptive names that you can look at without having to click and open every single one up. I can tell you why, because I've done this in large missions where suddenly you start small, scenario creep comes, you've got 40 triggers, and you're trying to figure out which one you need. Some good names, OP4 dot aircraft detected. You can probably guess what you're doing with that one. Blue 4 runway damage 25%. Another good and descriptive. You know what you're looking at. Bad names. Trigger blank. It will let you, in some cases, put a blank name in. That can be really frustrating. Unit detected. That might be all you need, but chances are you might want a little bit more than that. All right, this wraps up our section on triggers. Next up, we'll have a brief one on conditions, and hope you folks enjoyed. Thank you.